thank you. Just by way of a little bit of background, I run the valuation and advisory services team for Colliers International in London, and we cover the UK and Europe. And what I'm going to do today is essentially concentrate on office buildings in the UK. So here we go. Hopefully I'm not going to be too controversial. I thought I'd just look at a few building designs, new buildings, and see how things have moved on in a very short space of time. Does it matter? Why does it matter? I've looked at this not from the perspective of does global warming matter, but does it matter to landlords and to tenants? John's obviously touched on this a bit. I'll go into a little bit more detail. And then I'll go through the valuation implications. Is there any evidence that sustainable buildings are more valuable? So looking at new building design, this building we actually valued about 4 or 5 years ago when it was being constructed. Unilever, who probably do have a sustainable policy, so they thought it was probably a good thing to occupy a building which at the time was considered to be one of the most green in England. It has a BREEAM rating of very good. John's touched on BREEAM ratings, which, as I'll show you later, have become a very established method, certainly in the UK, of looking at the sustainability of a building. It has various abilities to reduce its carbon footprint, but you'll see it provides 10% of energy demand by way of ground source heat exchange. Just bear that in mind when I move on to the next example. Down the bottom, I've made the comment, it's on a business park. And yes, you can have a very sustainable building. You can have a building that maybe has got a zero carbon footprint, but you should really also take account of the carbon footprint of the people who drive there every day. I just throw that out. This building in Manchester, the Cooperative Group, is their new headquarters. It completes this summer. It will, if it gets the rating, be the only building in England with a BREEAM Outstanding and an EPC A rating. But if you just read some of the things they're having to do to achieve that, I think you can start to appreciate the difficulty and the expense of getting such a rating. Combined heat and power, not particularly cheap, not really that easy to do on single buildings. Here, they've got a combined heat and power plant that will serve a 20-acre site. Yes, it's been powered by rapeseed oil, which the Co-op are the second largest farmer, private farmer in the UK after the Queen. Yes, they can grow that themselves, so they can show a good sustainable approach there. But it's not cheap in providing all these facilities. One of the things, though, that the Co-op have done, which I think goes beyond simply the construction of the building, is that they have reduced the amount of square footage they need by having a paperless environment. Yes, that's very costly. You have to have the technology, you have to provide people with laptops and things like that. But they have concentrated on reducing the amount of square footage in the new building, which they compared with what they currently occupy. And that in itself is obviously very sustainable. It reduces the amount of building space they're occupying. And the last point here, it's in a city centre location. It's next to a train station. So compared with your out of town situation, most people are getting to work by way of public transport. The Shard in London, tallest building in Europe, I think, now. It's been topped out. It has a combined heat and power plant, again, run off plant oil. They say that it will have a 60% less CO2 emissions than its competitors. I think it just shows how important these issues are becoming. There are obviously a lot of tower blocks being constructed in the City of London at the moment, and it will be interesting to see how they vie with each other for how sustainable they are. Does it really matter? We did a short survey of owners, occupiers and property advisors to get their feedback on what is actually happening at the sharp end at the moment. And these are basically quotes from of quite a few people. I'll come on, highlight a few. The second one there, which is actually a building that we're acquiring for someone, 150,000 square feet, so it's not a small building. The issue of sustainability has not been raised by the tenant once. Now, the tenant is not from the UK, they are from the Middle East. So you might argue, do they really care? But it's interesting that in a major commitment, the sustainable issue has not been raised at all. I think the last comment there from a major Australian bank comes to the heart of where we are, unfortunately, with sustainability at the moment, in that this bank were very happy to have all the cost-saving issues that efficiencies come from sustainability, but they weren't prepared to pay a penny extra for it. Google's been mentioned today, and I think it is fair to say they probably would accept that one of the reasons they have gone down the route is that it makes it a more pleasant environment for people to work in, and therefore people stay at work longer and they work harder. We, at the end of last year, valued a property that was purchased by a Malaysian fund, 1 Silk Street in the City of London. It's the headquarters of Linklaters. It's cost £350 million. And it recently was awarded a BREEAM rating for an existing building. But it's interesting, you go around that building and it's got a wellness centre. So it's got doctors, it's got dentists, it's got hotel rooms, so you don't have to go home at night, you can stay there. It's got a fantastic restaurant. And yes, it is very sustainable, but it's so you stay at work all the time. If it goes hand in hand, I suppose you could argue it's not a bad thing. Property purchasers, are they bothered about sustainability? They're not. The example I've quoted down the bottom of a fund recently pulling out of a situation. This is something that I think that will grow considerably in the UK because of government legislation, and I'll come on to that. Just a few more. But the last one there, the reality, all the occupier wants to know is what is the running cost. And this has been touched on already today, and that's what occupiers are looking at. They're looking at the total cost of occupation. So that is rent, that is rates, local government taxation, but that is the cost of running the building. In the UK at the moment, it seems that there's a lot of stick going on and not much carrot for landowners. From 2018, it will be illegal to let or sell a building that has an EPC rating of F and G. Now that has an implication to buildings. If we go back to the last comment there, the one about the fund pulling out, it pulled out because this building had an EPC rating of F. So that is showing a direct impact on value. The government in the UK are not leasing any buildings that are not A, B or C rated. You might say that's important. It isn't really, because the government aren't leasing any space at all. They're actually getting out of anything they can. But it shows a willingness. It shows a direction for developers of new space. Some people argue that there ought to be a bit of carrot. There should be an encouragement for occupiers or owners of buildings to go green. In the US, some states do give you kickbacks on tax. In the UK, that's not really the case. Colliers are a huge worldwide organisation, third largest property consultants. Some people would call us estate agents, I think, but I would like to call us property consultants. Third largest in the world. Last summer we did a survey, occupier survey, in Asia, and a couple of points that came out of that. I think there's a balance here. Yes, there's an increasing amount of occupiers that are concerned about sustainability, but if you read that last one, the percentage that believe there is strategic value is the same percentage that believe that's not enough to warrant paying extra rent. Simplistically, and this obviously is very simplistic, in central London, standard model, rent and rates could easily be 90% of your costs. So where the sustainable element can help is only 10%. But if you actually halve the 10% cost of running your building, you're saving quite a lot, which might go to the occupier in a saving, or it might go to the landlord in extra rent. From the surveys that we've looked at, if you go down the sustainable route, then you might be able to save up to 50% of your running costs. Looking at the Google example, second point there, US government survey showed 7 different locations, 22 buildings, where green buildings were showing a considerable less energy consumption and CO2 consumption. But the line in bold there, I think, is very important. And they had a 27% higher satisfaction rating for its occupants. So again, happy workers helps a company. I think the last 2 points there, British Land and Hermes, yes, they're obviously trying to be sustainable, but you look at those savings, and they are a few years ago, but 700,000 per annum in energy savings by British Land compares with the Co-op's estimate of 500,000 a year in one building alone. So I think that shows there's a way to go yet. So now we come on to the exciting bit, the valuation implications. What is certainly true is the number of green buildings in the UK is on an increase. I think most developers and institutions are pretty signed up to the story. Where's the proof of that? In 2000, 1% of new buildings in the UK had a BREEAM rating. It's estimated now, June 2011, that 30% had that rating. So that's a significant sea change. The stick part is the last 2 there. It's estimated that 600,000 commercial properties have an EPC rating of F and G, 18% of the total. So if you're an owner of one of those buildings, you've got a bit of a problem ahead, because you won't be able to let it into beyond 2018 unless you upgrade it. So that is a significant issue, and one that I think most landlords have only started to address. It's estimated that there's almost 700,000 properties in the private rented sector that also fall into that category. Generally, the upgrading rate of buildings in the UK is 1 or 2%. So maybe this legislation is good for builders, because there's a lot of upgrading going to have to happen over the next 6 years, unless the government, of course, push out that date of 2018. For owners and occupiers of property, there are significant risk factors of not going down the green route. If you go down the route, you will reduce your energy price. You will reduce your water costs. You reduce your exposure to legislation. If you're in a F or G building at the moment, you've got a problem in 2018. Sorry. And obviously, if you go down the green route, then you're hedging against changes in tenant preferences and landlord preferences. So, what is the evidence of the performance of sustainable buildings to date? And unfortunately, this isn't particularly good news, because if you see there, look there, over the last 12 months, they don't seem to do any better. Now, this is a survey that's, a survey is part of the IPD data. IPD, I don't know if you're aware of, is the universal performance indicator of property. And this is for the UK, and this is the sustainable element they were able to monitor. And they've been doing this since 2009. And for the last year, it doesn't seem to make any difference whether you've got a sustainable building or not. But the comment at the end there, given the small sample size, the fact that sustainability factors have not yet been priced into the market valuations, anything we note in the most recent performance numbers must be treated with a high degree of caution. Now, basically, the sample size isn't great enough, and the detail they have about the sustainable buildings is not great enough. So, they're relaunching it. This September, you've had a number of investors have agreed to have a comprehensive study undertaken of each of their buildings. And the valuers are helping doing this for them. And it is hoped then that the sample size will be much greater, and going forward we'll be able to plot the sustainable, whether green buildings perform better than non-green. At the bottom, comment from Bill Hughes of L&G. He obviously thinks that it is going to become more of an issue going forward. John referred to the Maastricht University study, where it has been published by the RICS. The indications are some quite fanciful numbers in terms of better performance of BREEAM rated buildings that isn't supported by the IPD data. The Maastricht University study, I think, is again not large enough. It's not detailed enough to really be able to evaluate whether sustainable buildings are performing better. But if these stats were correct, then it's a no-brainer for a landlord. But at the moment, to me, it seems that a new building is likely to have a BREEAM rating. And if it's a new building, it is likely to perform in capital and rental terms better than an old building. Yes, part of that is because it will be more sustainable, it will have a lower running cost. But it is also because it's new, and people like new buildings and they don't tend to like older ones. New buildings are much more efficient, and for major occupiers, particularly in London, then efficiency is extremely important. Coming back to this Unilever headquarters in Leatherhead, it's being sold at the moment. 11 years unexpired, rents about £25 a square foot, just under that, which is probably about the market rent, quoting 6.5%. Does it have a premium for being green? It doesn't appear to be. It's going to be sold probably at a similar yield to a building that possibly doesn't have all its green credentials. That does apply at the moment. I don't think that will apply in the future. So just to summarise, certainly my view is that occupiers are much more green focused now, partly because of legislation, partly because of corporate responsibility, but I think it's largely for some because they know that they can get more out of their workers if they have a very good environment for them to work in. Unfortunately, based upon the statistics, I don't think there is much to support a significant premium for sustainable buildings at the moment in terms of rental or capital value. I think there is evidence that new buildings perform better. There is certainly a substantial increase in sustainable buildings being constructed in the UK, and particularly London. And you're having cutting-edge innovation by people like the Co-op. I don't think it will be repeated wide scale at the moment, but at least it shows the way. At least it shows other people what can be achieved. The most important thing driving change in sustainable building design and the approach of occupiers, I think at the moment, is government action. And there is a pretty big stick being waved at the moment. Not much carrot, other than the lower running costs, which for most people is fairly straightforward. I think if I was speaking to you in 2 or 3 years' time, I think I would probably be able to show you that sustainable buildings do outperform. But there isn't that evidence, I believe, currently. But things are changing very rapidly. If you look at that Unilever building and then the Co-op building, a huge sea change. I think you'll see that move on over the coming years, particularly obviously in areas where there is a lot of construction going on, like the City of London. It is obviously harder for you in your economy where there isn't much new building going on to sign up and design buildings, and unless you're doing it with an occupier in tow, to these extremely high standards that are required. Thank you.